It's going to be just 1 second.
Great.
Okay, you are live.
Good morning and welcome to the Legislature's Joint Standing Committee on Energy, Utilities and Technology. We are here this morning to hear an interim report on the distributed generation stakeholder group from the Governor's Energy Office. And we will begin, as always, with committee introductions. I will ask my Senate chair to introduce himself first. And you all are stuck with me today. I'll be chairing because he's got some other work to attend to. Senator Lawrence, can you hear me?
Yes, I can, and I apologize for not having my video on. I have some technology issues today, but this connection is much better if I don't turn on the video. I am State Senator Mark Lawrence, the co-chair of the Energy, Utilities and Technology Committee, and I represent Southern York County, the towns of Kittery, Elliott, South Berwick, York, and Ogunquit.
Thank you, Senator Lawrence. And I'll go next to Senator Vitelli.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Senator Eloise Vitelli. I represent Senate District 23, which is all of Saginaw County and the town of Dresden and Lincoln County, and I'm pleased to be here this morning.
And so I am a constituent as well. I'm a very proud one. We'll go next to Representative Wadsworth.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Nate Wadsworth, and I represent House District 70, Southern Oxford County.
Excellent. In no particular order, just on my screen, Representative Cuddy.
Good morning. My name is Scott Cuddy. I represent House District 98, which is Winterport, Frankfort, Searsport, and Swanville, and I live in Winterport.
Thank you, Representative Sachs.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, everyone. My name is Melanie Sachs. I proudly represent House District 48, which is Freeport and part of Pownell.
Representative Ziegler.
Good morning. Let me get my video back. I'm Representative Paige Ziegler from Waldo County, District 96, the 7 towns of Belmont, Liberty, Lincolnville, Mount Vermora, Palermo, and Searsmont.
At the end of this session, we will all attempt to say that as rapidly as Representative Ziegler, as a tongue twister exercise. Representative Kessler.
Good morning. I'm Representative Chris Kessler, South Portland, representing District 32, which is part of South Portland and a little smidgen of Cape Elizabeth. Go fight in 30 seconds.
Excellent. Representative Grabsky.
Good morning, all. Nicole Grahowski. I represent House District 132, which is the city of Ellsworth and the town of Trenton, Hancock County.
And last but definitely not least, Representative Foster.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm Steve Foster, representing District 104, the towns of Dexter, Garland, Exeter, Stetson, and Charleston.
Great. Thank you all very much. That's most of the committee, and others may be able to join us from their other tasks or their legislative tasks and committees, we hope. But this will all be recorded on YouTube for posterity. My name is Seth Berry, and I represent House District 55, which is Bowdoin-Bodenham, most of Richmond, and beautiful Swan Island on the Kennebec. As always, we have with us our committee analyst, Lindsay Laxon, and our committee clerk, Jason Allerding, and we will go ahead and ask Jason to promote the Governor's Energy Office. I'm not sure which members of the staff will be necessary for the presentation, but I trust that you can figure that out, and let me know if you have any questions. As always, this being not a public hearing is not an opportunity for public comment, but we certainly welcome comments from the public at any time. You can reach us via our committee analyst, and that's eut@legislature.maine.gov. And it looks like we have Director Dan Burgess from the Governor's Energy Office now with us, as well as Ethan Tremblay. And we welcome you to give us this, to present this report. It is in our email inboxes, and perhaps someone, our committee clerk or analyst, could bump it up for us just to make sure that it it is in everyone's hands. And Director Burgess, would you find it helpful to be able to share a screen, or how would you like to proceed?
Morning, Chairman Lawrence, Chairman Barry and Chairman Lawrence and the committee. I believe we sent slides over to Lindsay, who
Excellent.
We did just send them a little bit ago. So
excellent. So if the committee's ready, I will share my screen.
Very good. Let's go ahead.
All right.
and while Lindsay's doing that, I might take the opportunity to introduce Ethan Tremblay, who is an energy policy analyst in the governor's energy office. I'm not sure that the committee's had the opportunity to meet him yet. Been with us a year and a day. Actually, we just realized yesterday, a year and a day. And then Melissa Winnie, who is familiar to you all, is also here. And with that, Chairman Barry, am I good to go through it?
Excellent. It looks like it. I think so. We can all see it on the screen. And thanks for introducing your staff, and the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you. So I would also note that we've asked a couple other folks that participated in the working group to provide an update in a couple of these sections. We have Caitlin Kelly O'Neill from the Community Solar Association and Fortunat Mueller from Revision, as well as, depending on availability, Phelps Turner from Conservation Law Foundation. He had a conflict and is going to try to join should his other endeavor wrap up. But either way, the goal of today is to provide you with an update of the interim report of the DG stakeholder working group. Next slide. So as a reminder, last session, the legislature passed LD 936, which did took a number of different actions, established additional eligibility requirements for DG resources, and really kind of paused the program for larger size projects, repealed the requirement for the PUC to conduct DG procurements, given that they had conducted one, and then that was ultimately not successful. The legislature repealed that. And then finally directed the GEO with the PUC to convene a stakeholder group to look at programs, or to look at distributed generation, that what a new program could look like between the years 2024 and 2028. There, in the forthcoming year, we'll talk a little bit about some cost benefit analysis and review of existing program, but the focus really of this effort that was in LD 936 was to look at out years and what a new program could look like, and also look at kind of opportunities for grid planning and how those could work together. And we'll give you an update on both of those. So this is the interim report that was due the January 1st, and then there's a second final report due 1 year from now. And so we're going to walk you through the process over the last 3 to 4 months of 2021, and then talk about what we see the process for the next year looking like. Next slide. So again, as a reminder, the interim report is to identify issues that need further consideration or additional resources to complete, and looking at these categories: how the state should undertake adoption and implementation of a holistic grid planning process, looking at what the quote optimum amount of total distributed generation for the program would be, using 7% based on operational capacity as the marker for that. And then looking forward, how to cost effectively incentivize NEB project diversity. So again, using this optimum amount, looking at load growth and what the impacts would be there, looking at opportunities for not just solar, but all types of DG to be paired with energy storage, determining the appropriate amount for long-term contracts, and then to look at mechanisms for siting for low income, again, grid performance and what a process should look like, and then how to support small businesses in the state. So this was the general charge. It does, some of this is in the interim report, and then others is more forward looking that the group plans to tackle over the next year. Next slide. So we convened a group, GEO, Commissioner Bartlett, the public advocate, Tony Buxton for IACG, Bob Cleaves of Dirigo Solar, a representative from Maine Municipal Association, from both utilities. We were required to have an economist, and we have Sharon Klein from the University of Maine, again, Fortunat and Caitlin, Jeremy Payne, Jessica Robertson from Borrego, the Conservation Law Foundation, and then predominantly Nils Zellers from CEI. And those seats were required by the legislation. So that's who's been meeting. I'll just say I appreciate all the time that folks spent working through these issues. I think we've produced a document that we'll talk to you about that is was consensus based. Really, in some instances, going word by word in a few different lines to make sure that there was general comfort level with the approach. And I think you look at the diversity of this group. I think you'd recognize that there were issues that weren't always easy to get general comfort level or consensus with. So I feel like we spent a lot of time on Zoom screens looking at Word docs together to get this interim report right. Next slide. So we met 8 times between September and December. We invited, all these meetings were conducted in a public setting, and we had good participation, not just from the stakeholders on the group, but also from the other interested parties. Each time we allowed public comment, allowed input, allowed documents to be submitted and to be reviewed. And then we took, we sought out presentations suggested by the group, but then also recommended by some of these from our office of experts from across the country as they're looking at trends in distributed generation and what they see as opportunities and kind of forward-looking policies that are, again, happening across the country. So we heard from Massachusetts talking about their program. We heard from North Carolina, or the Carolinas and Duke Energy with and some of the solar work that they're doing there. We heard from Clean Energy States Alliance, which is a organization which who's been before this committee before, but really was able to present a broader view of examples from other states. Heard from Carl Rabago, who has done some DG analysis of some really deep analysis on impacts. Maine Audubon, talking a lot about some of the siting tools. Barbara Alexander from ARP, representing ARP, looking at a whole host of issues from cost to low-income impacts or income impacts. And Dr. Silkman of CES presented on his modeling and take, particularly focused on DG as well. So we really sought to bring in the experts from in Maine and then across the country to help inform the group and really try to level set the current state of play to help inform our work. We also split up into subgroups, recognizing that it might be more efficient that way, and there were different interests at different parties that met multiple times. One focused on grid planning, yet other focused on what a process would look like to establish a new DG program in 2024 and 2028. Next slide. So there are 4 high-level areas of consensus that the group agreed on, and we feel like that will guide our work. The first is that the group agreed that DG will play an important role in the state's achievement of our climate and clean energy goals. The second is that DG has the potential to produce benefits to the system as well as to the state through avoided costs, as well as resilience, environmental, public health, and economic benefits. And to the extent to which those benefits should be incorporated as objectives of the next program, there needs to be additional analysis to consider how to best capture those benefits and what to prioritize. The third is that any program that supports DG should be designed to optimize net benefits as well as ratepayer cost effectiveness. And we spent a lot of time talking about the cost and benefits and additional analysis that we need to do over the next year of what that looks like. And that as we think about the future of distributed generation and that 7% number, or what the quote optimum number needs to be, we need to look at what's developed in this current program. What is going to, what could be developed in the current NEB program. Further, the group felt like or I feel like the group did a nice job of reaching out to a broad range of stakeholders, but as we get into some of the specific details of program design, which you hear a little bit more about, we need to make sure that we're continuing that and doing focused work for low and moderate income, fixed income, and historically marginalized communities. So finally, I've got commitment from the group to keep meeting throughout this year to refine the approach, and we'll talk a little bit more about that process. Next slide. So I'm just going to give a quick overview of energy billing status, and then we'll turn to Fortunat and Caitlin to talk about next steps for the next year. Next slide. So this update is in the report. We do have some numbers that we could provide after today about updates to this, but generally, if you look at what has been in net energy billing as of November, what you can see is that all the way to the bottom left in the blue and the yellow, that's megawatts installed and operational through the net energy billing program. So we kind of looked when the committee met last year, you could still see this trend of there being some projects moving forward, but that predominantly the majority of projects were still in that not operational or pending status. You can see that's true both for CMP and Versant. So that's the chart to the left. We have updates that looks pretty similar for this month as well. And then the chart to the right shows what DG resources are participating in net energy billing. So predominantly, you can see that solar makes up the largest tranche, but also that we've seen some smaller hydro and other resources participate as well. Next slide. So the chart on the left shows, again, this is in the report, shows that the project status and size by category. So we thought it was important to show what we're seeing as a trend here is that the active, not operational projects are predominantly 2 megawatts and above. So the program, as you know, is capped at 5 megawatts. So it's 2 megawatts to 5 megawatt projects. And what we're seeing is that that's the majority of projects that are in the queue or the potential for them. I think worth noting that the 25 kilowatt or less, think of that as rooftop. So what we've seen is just a continued growth trajectory or trajectory of that year over year. And that we have seen some under 2 megawatt projects come in. We have seen some projects move from 5 megawatts to below 2 megawatts over the last 6 months. But predominantly, you can see the active, non-operational, and pending projects are that 2 to 5 category. And then on the right, you'll see that you can also see how many customers have signed up or enrolled for an energy billing program. So think of these as the off-takers or the communities shared subscribers. And you can see that we're in the 10,000 customer range in Maine right now, probably a little bit more over the last month and a half. But we've gone from under 4,000 customers or off-takers participating in the program to roughly 10,000. So 6,000 new customers engaged in the program in the last 2 years or more. Next slide. So next, want to invite Fortunat to be beamed over, if that's okay, with Caitlin Kelly O'Neill to talk about the group that they led around successor program framework and what the group envisions our work being the next year.
Great, thank you, Director Burgess.
Hey, good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. My name is Fortunat Mueller. I'm co-founder, president of Revision Energy, and had the opportunity to be a part of this stakeholder group with Dan and Ethan and the others you mentioned. If you could go right to the next slide, great. I'll talk a little bit about some of the considerations we talked about for the successor program. Which is really the question of how are we going to be building, 2 to 5 megawatt solar projects in the time period 24 to 28. Some of the things that I think both the stakeholder group and this committee and the legislature in general have felt are desirable in a DG program, but that the current NEP program doesn't necessarily do as well as it could, include things like recognizing locational value, that energy does not have the same value everywhere on the grid, and that we ought to be a little smarter about the way we are citing projects, including energy storage, ensuring equitable access for low income and other disadvantaged populations, and land use considerations. And so as we talked about the successor program, we tried to talk about how can we capture as many of these, recognizing, of course, that the other challenges in front of us is to do it at the lowest possible cost to ratepayers. And so how do we balance those two things? Move on to the next slide. In terms of structure, the stakeholder group discussed a number of possible structures for a successor program, and a couple are included in this description here. One is a competitive procurement, similar to the one under 3482 that Dan mentioned that didn't work, or the ones under 3210 that for utility scale. A second option discussed is what in this document is called a feed-in tariff, which is really the commission sets a program size and sets a price, and then it's first come, first serve, and the price is typically set either through some value-based calculation or some cost-based approach. And then the third model that we discussed is a hybrid model where instead of asking the commission to set a rate, you use a competitive procurement to let the free market set the rate, and then successive projects can participate kind of in a walk-up program. So once the rate is set, it stays set automatically. That's similar to what Massachusetts and Vermont and a few other states have done. The stakeholder group just discussed extensively that there are pros and cons to each of these, both from the customer's perspective, the developer's perspective, the commission's perspective. And we're going to continue to discuss over the coming year, how do we capture the most benefits at the lowest possible ratepayer cost. And the stakeholder group was explicit in acknowledging that, one of the challenges here is the more complicated you make it, the more co-benefits you try to capture, the more cost there is in the program somewhere. And so we have to find that sweet spot where we are capturing those values that the legislature and other stakeholders think are really important, and again, at the lowest possible cost. Next slide, please. Dan mentioned in the intro that the group, in accordance with the enabling legislation, calculated the possible size of a program at 7% of the load during the program period, and that arithmetic comes to 790 megawatts, or about 158 megawatts per year over 5 years. While probably not wildly out of line, the group did acknowledge that the 7% is admittedly somewhat arbitrary, and so as we continue, we will I think continue to discuss and try to gather data on what is an optimum number, including both total economics. We heard some interesting presentation from an entity who has done an extensive modeling on sort of what's the total lowest cost solution in terms of mix of DG and utility scale renewables on the way to 100% renewables. And then as Dan mentioned, also considering how NEB 1.0 continues to evolve, right? That program, according to legislation, had a goal of about 750 megawatts built. I think Dan's slide showed that we've accomplished something like 100 so far in the first 2 years, although we expect that to pick up. So as we get closer to 2024, we'll know how NEB 1.0 did, and that may impact sort of the size and the ambition of this next 4 or 5 year period. 2 more slides, I believe. So yeah, move forward, please. Thank you. Again, based on the instructions from your committee and legislature, the group is focused primarily in the market segment between 2 and 5 megawatts, though we did discuss that it's possible that the work we're doing could apply to projects both larger than 5 and possibly smaller than 2. So we left open the possibility in the coming year as we discuss and refine the program specifics that we would expand a little bit. We also discussed that there may be project parameters other than size that define sort of which program and how a project should be treated. And in particular, some of the ones we discussed, you can see here, should projects that are co-located with load, either behind the customer meter, adjacent to a customer, load, or even on the same circuit, on the same electrical distribution circuit, be treated differently for projects that are across the state or a different circuit. I don't think we have an answer to this question, but we did discuss it's worth continuing to discuss whether that is a meaningful distinction in addition to or instead of size in some cases. And finally, next slide, please. One of the things that makes NEB so popular, as I'm sure you all acknowledge, is that it provides opportunities for customer bill savings, whether that's an individual industrial consumer or a whole bunch of residential subscribers in a community solar farm. People like to participate because it saves them money. On the flip side, customer acquisition and cost of billing customers and putting them in and allocating them to projects and then all the billing and meter the utilities have to do in terms of allocating those credits is definitely one of the drivers of cost of small projects. And so the group discussed whether there is an opportunity and how desirable it would be to have a successor program, where maybe there is no customer per se, but the PUC is procuring the energy on behalf of all payers, as they do in the utility scale procurement under 3210. On the slide, you can see there are some advantages and disadvantages. Most of the advantages relate to lower cost. The disadvantages, of course, is that you take away that opportunity for individual customers to make investments in reducing their energy. And so, as with most of the things on the previous slide, this remains as sort of a task for us in the coming year to think about as we refine and design that successor program. What's the role of the off-taker, if any, in that program? And I think with that, I will hand it to Caitlin.
Excellent, thank you. And I trust you're all staying on in case we have questions for any of you. Great. Caitlin, welcome.
Great, thank you. Good morning, everybody. I'm Caitlin Kelly-O'Neill, the Northeast Regional Director for the Coalition for Community Solar Access. So as Director Burgess and Fortunat have explained, the stakeholder group completed a significant amount of work in the past few months. We had a number of discussions, but we recognized that we needed to really dig into some of these questions more deeply in the coming year, and we also would need some additional assistance to help inform our decisions and recommendations. So I'm just going to go over with you the process that we're recommending for completing the final report in the coming year. Next slide. So one of the ways that the stakeholder group is recommending we really dig deeper into these issues is by forming issue-focused working sessions and working groups. And then in addition to that, we are recommending that the Governor's Energy Office should contract with an expert team to provide to help facilitate these sessions and also to provide technical assistance and more additional information and analysis to help inform the discussions and inform our recommendations. We do specifically recommend at least 2 working groups, one focused on equity and access to really ensure that the recommended design is equitable, is providing direct benefits to low income and disadvantaged communities, to environmental justice communities, and ensuring that all main ratepayers have the opportunity to participate in and benefit from the expansion of renewable energy and solar energy. The second specific recommendation that we're making for an issue-focused working group is on land use. It's just, we recognize that it's certainly a high priority topic. It was certainly a topic that we discuss frequently, and it's just something that we certainly want to make sure that we bring other stakeholders and other experts in to join the conversation. And we do make recommendations about who else might be participating in these working groups. Frankly, this is just we recommended who we thought would be issue experts on these topics, as well as recommendations to ensure that the work of this stakeholder group is coordinated with the work of other stakeholder groups that the state is conducting. While these are the two specific working groups we recommend, there could be the opportunity for more working groups. There could be a battery storage working group that's developed. There could be a billing and crediting working group that's developed. I think these are the two that we strongly recommend, but we also say that depending upon the progress of the larger stakeholder working group, more issue focused groups can be developed. Next slide, please. And so from the input of the issue focused working groups and also the analysis as provided by a technical expert, these groups and experts will report back to the larger stakeholder working group. And so with this additional input and these additional recommendations, the larger stakeholder group can come together and provide final recommendations on the required issues and topics that the law asked us to touch on in the final report. So, this includes issues that, as we mentioned, we discussed over the past few months, but really weren't able to come to consensus on. So questions of what's the optimum amount of capacity that should be in this second 2.0 group. What is an estimation of net ratepayer impacts? Can we identify methods to balance the impact of the development of DG resources under the Maine revised statutes? Updates to finance enabling policies in the Maine distributed solar valuation study. Other considerations to look at costs and benefits and the total impact on Maine ratepayers. What is our recommendation for what will be the greatest value to Maine? Next slide. And so over the coming year, our recommendation and our plan is to have this expert technical analysis and these issue focused working groups conducted really more in the first half of the year. And then the stakeholder group will come together, and by incorporating the recommendations of the issue focused groups, by utilizing the expert analysis, the DG stakeholder group will develop a straw proposal. So the straw proposal would contain the final recommendations that would eventually be in the final report. But before a final report is written and issued back to this committee, a proposal would be issued for public comment. We're recommending at least a 30-day public comment period so that members of the public can provide their feedback, can review it. And then there will be an opportunity for the stakeholder group to review public comment, review the public feedback, incorporate it into the final report, make changes they feel are appropriate, and then at that point would provide the final report back to this committee and delivered consistent with the act by the first of the year in 2023. And that's it.
Thanks.
Excellent, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Caitlin and Fortunato. Appreciate it. Thought it'd be helpful to hear from others on the group instead of just hearing from me, Chairman Barry. So it looks like we're not going to have Phelps, so I'll run through the other part of the piece of the work that was done. I think fair to say we spent a great deal of time on what was just covered, but also did spend time on the grid planning piece. So next slide. So again, charged to consider the need for improved grid planning, how to undertake it, grid planning process, and then how that can be included to improve a DG program. I think we see these going in some ways hand in hand, where if you're going to, as Caitlin and Fortunato talked about, if you're going to incentivize distributed generation in a certain area, you need to make sure you understand what the impacts, why it makes sense, why that area might be the most cost effective or the most beneficial from a grid perspective. There may be other reasons to decide it somewhere else, such as landfills, brownfields, things like that. But from a grid perspective, you need to think about the work there. And so this what you have in the report is an interim summary. I think the group feels like we need to spend a little bit more time on this topic, but did kind of kick off a good discussion. Next slide. So ideas about how to move forward included the Climate Council called for a power sector transformation process, which is a review that or a process which multiple other states have taken in one form or another, from New York's REV process to Rhode Island having a power sector transformation process, and as well as working on that third bullet. Many of you are familiar with the Maine Utility Regulatory Reform Initiative, or MRDI, that was released last year. I think our group felt the MRDI document was helpful. The idea of an overarching process made sense, and we talk a little bit about what that could look like. The second bullet I think is really worth pointing out in this for consideration here is that the Public Utilities Commission has a proceeding, a grid modernization proceeding that is focused on planning and gaps and needs of DERs, or distributed energy resources. So that work has actively been happening late last year into this year, and our understanding is that there will be a report forthcoming in February or thereabout about the planning gaps, needs, and analysis for that. And so for a DG focused group, I think there was a sense that the Utilities Commission is undertaking this work, has a consultant on board that's that's working on that, and so felt like we wanted to see the results of that before we recommended a process that could potentially be duplicative or shown as not needed for the PUC document. That being said, felt like any sort of process going forward should make sure that there's public review and comment, that it can be implemented, that there may be funding needed at the PUC and GEO if there's, depending on the depth of that. The group talked about seeing in some other states being considered of a forward-looking plan with interim updates, so that there was a 10-year type plan or thereabouts that could be submitted and reviewed. And there was talk about how to potentially utilize interconnection fees or look at cost recovery for how different funding opportunities to do that. Those were some of the ideas put out. Next slide. So how could it be processed to look at DG specifically? So we talked about location-based price signals that may be challenging currently, but could be something that we point to. But I think it was also brought out that when you send a price signal for someone to develop in a certain area, based on that could increase the benefits, but also should be mindful that likely development would happen there and would need to be dynamic in a way to say, okay, there's been development here, we need to adjust on where we go in the future, if that makes sense. So if you point a price to the market to a certain area based on grid planning or other benefits, then need to be nimble enough to be able to adjust that as development happens. But so we talked about what could be useful, load forecasts. Obviously, we have that from a macro level for electrification, but more micro forecasting, looking at opportunities for load flexibility and the impacts of that, looking at the overall equity, energy, and climate objectives. And then obviously you need to think about what we talked about beforehand, which was how much DG, how to ensure that it's cost effective, looking at the system upgrades that are going to be needed and how to deal with those and utilize who pays for those, particularly on interconnection, and then again looking at costs. So next slide. This is our last one. That was our last one. So I think, Chairman, obviously, happy to take questions. I'm glad to have other folks from the working group here. I think the group felt like, again, over the last 3 to 4 months that we've made some good progress, kind of setting the table for the work over the next year. I think we're, we do have, I believe we've scheduled the meeting again already for the end of this month or early next month to continue that work and to look at, based, I think, on feedback from the committee, what makes sense for next steps as we begin to scope out, what could be needed for study and analysis and stakeholder engagement. We're going to, GEO will obviously take the lead on that, but, we want the group to continue to inform the work, because I think I'll just end. You've got you've charged us to work with, and I think appropriately, a wide variety of stakeholders: utilities, industry, solar industry, environment, low income, and the general public. So I think we've made progress, and happy to take questions.
Great, thank you very much, Director Burgess, Ms. O'Neill, Mr. Mueller. And we will turn right to the committee to see who does have questions. And this is a great opportunity to touch base on this important work while it's unfolding. So hopefully we've all had a chance to review the report, and this presentation was helpful in reviewing it. But any questions from the tall to the small are welcome at this time. So who wants to kick it off? Representative Foster, thank you for saving us from that awkward silence. Okay, go right ahead.
You're welcome. Good morning, Mr. Burgess. Couple of quick questions. You may not have the answers to these this morning, but you can add them to the list of questions that the Governor's Energy Office is looking into for this committee, if you would. First of all, on your slide number 7, you show what I believe is 1,190 megawatts of active projects. I'm wondering if you could provide the type of installation, for instance, rooftop, how much of that's rooftop, how much of that is in acreage, farmland, or brownfield installations, that type of thing. I'm assuming that those active, not operational projects, that information is available for those as well as the operational projects.
Thanks for the question, Representative. So we can certainly provide the category or size, and I think we can make some general estimations of if it's rooftop or not, given the size of it. I'm going to look towards Ethan on my team to confirm, but I don't believe we have the ability through the PUC reporting system of those projects to indicate whether it's, where it's located. So I think there's actually I think it's as in like what type of, what's underneath it. Is it brownfield, landfill, greenfield, or ag? I will say, parallel to this, we worked with the ACF on a stakeholder process around agricultural impacts to solar, and so we can provide some of that analysis, but some of it we don't know yet.
Right, and obviously, as Ms. O'Neill pointed out, and we're hearing here and there, this has become an issue now, as it's been brought up actually 2 or 3 years ago, but now there's a lot more concern as people see where some of these installations are, especially with croplands and such. My second question would be in relation to slide number 10. On slide 10, I believe you show the number of customers taking advantage of the program, and I think that's a little over 9,600, I believe, is what I'm seeing there. But what I'm wondering is, do you have the information on what the total customers for both Versant and CMP would be in comparison? If not, if you could, what I'm looking at is basically of that, what I see is about 9,600. What percentage does that equate to for all customers in those areas served? Thank you.
Thanks, Representative. Happy to follow up with that information. It would be, what I don't know is if we will have the, some of these are larger industrial customers, and kind of the, my sense is they'd be treated as, Ethan can correct me if I'm wrong, but as one, right? Where, so it may not show load comparison, but at least show customer comparison.
Sure, that would be fine. And where you have those industrial customers, if you just note that as such, that's obviously a good point. Thank you.
Thanks.
Great. Before we go on to the next question, I do want to give Senator Stewart an opportunity to introduce himself.
Hey, good morning, folks. Sorry, I jumped on a couple minutes late and missed introductions, but I'm Trey Stewart, State Senator in District 2, 51 communities in Aroostook and Penobscot counties, and I reside in Presque Isle.
Excellent, thank you. And I see Representative Kessler next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, Director Burgess and DG team. Thank you for the presentation this morning. The first thing that, or my first reaction is there still needs to be a lot more information gathering. And when it comes to the grid modernization docket at the PUC, it sounds like we need to get the full results from that docket in order to do your work. Would you say that that is a necessity for you to continue with planning the new structure?
Thanks for the question, Representative Kessler. I think that the group felt like it was important to inform, right? So that we would know what the PUC or their consultant, informed by a number of stakeholder interviews and feedback, what the gaps, at least on the distribution system planning, are and what the opportunities are. So I think we through this process came up with a number of different, continue the conversation around, okay, what could it look like and what should it do? But I think we all felt a little bit hesitant knowing that that process was underway. So I think it's fair to say we should see what that says and then react from there.
May I ask a follow-up question?
Yes, absolutely.
Do you have a sense as to when that will be complete?
My sense, we'd put in the report, I think February. I don't have an updated time frame, but within the next month or two. And Chairman Bartlett's not here, but that was my understanding of the general time frame.
Okay.
Great. Did you have any follow-ups, Representative Kessler? And you're muted.
I'll stand down for now and let other people ask questions.
Okay, very good. Senator Vitelli.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Quick question, maybe. I think it was Caitlin who said that a straw proposal would be presented for public comment sometime in 2022. Do you have any further sense of when that is going to come out and what it's going to look like? I guess it's a question for Caitlin.
So I think we don't have a definite timeline for the issuance of the straw proposal. I think when we were planning out the process for preparing the final report, it was recommended to have a straw proposal and have public comment, incorporate public comment on that. I mean, it depends upon the continued information gathering we have to do over the winter, spring, probably maybe into early summer. We're recommending at least a 30-day, if you account for the fact that we're recommending a 30-day public comment period on the straw proposal and then reviewing comments to incorporate into a final report. I mean, if we get too far into the fall, we're going to be hustling by the end of the year to finish that report. So I think that's probably the general timeline we're looking at. But I think we'll probably have more clarity once we actually start these issue-based discussions and start getting the input from the technical expert.
Okay. Yeah, no, thank you. I anticipated that you were going to look to these issue-focused groups to feed into the straw proposal, and just so this process is iterative. And
yes.
Okay, appreciate that. Thank you.
Great. Okay, I see Senator Vitelli's hand is down, so we'll go next to Representative Grochowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you all for being here. Great to have a presentation from a couple voices. Appreciate that. My question, I went back and looked at the bill, and I know that we intentionally gave a lot of different types of stakeholders to this group. So I commend you all for working together and finding points of consensus. But point B I would make is that we recognize that might be a challenge, and we intentionally included the language that we wanted to see recommendations supported by a majority of stakeholders to make your path a little more clear in terms of, removing outlier opinions, if you will. And so one thing I was hoping to see, because the legislature has the ability to put out bill language based on this report, was maybe some suggestions for things that we might want to consider. I know when I was on the storage group with some of the other members here, we actually provided, draft language to consider, to act on. Is that something, is there anything that you all recommend, or is there going to be a process where you might give us feedback? I'm not saying that we'll necessarily do exactly what a majority of you think we should do, but it would be nice to have that to react to. And I wonder if you can comment on if there's any plan to do that within this session.
Thanks, Representative. I'm happy to take that. And then, we don't have the full working group here. And so my sense is that there's probably a wide variety of opinions on that. I think my sense of the group was that because it was focused on 2024, 2028 programming, that there may not be legislation needed now to do that. And so that's why we put forward this process over the next year of what was Caitlin was just mentioning, of this is how we would refine what a program looks like over the next year with input from stakeholders. So I think that was the sense of the group. I think we tried to be really kind of looking towards that 24, 28 timeline, but Caitlin and Fortunate, I'd be happy to get your thoughts on it too.
Yeah, I think that's right. We see this as its title, as an interim report, with, I think, obviously a fair bit of meat to fill in on the bones. And to your point, Representative, I suspect that the more detail you add to the report, the harder it is to do it with total consensus. And so appreciate the reminder that while the goal is consensus, that may not be where we end up. But I think so far, Ethan and Director Burgess have done an awesome job of sort of building the framework under the consensus model, which I think is really important. Now we can fill in the details over the coming year.
Representative Growski, any follow-up?
Sure, thanks. Yeah, and I appreciate that this is on a longer timeline. One of the things that I think this committee might need to take action on is making sure you have the right resources to go forward with your work, particularly economic analysis. I know that's important to, I think, everybody on this committee. We talk about the financial implications of these programs, I think, pretty much every time we meet. So I guess I'm wondering, have there been any identified contractors to do work like that, for instance? Is that something that we're going to expect to see through a supplemental budget proposal, or should we be thinking about outlining what we want to see and putting a fiscal note on it? I'm just really concerned that we make sure that we give this group the resources it needs to finish that report. And part of my discussion with the GEO on this bill when we got to the fiscal process was, let's wait to give a lot of funding for this until we hear back from this group about what the necessities are. So any clarity you can provide on what we might need to be doing or alerting ourselves to regarding the future plans for the function of the group would be helpful.
Thanks, Representative. I can tell you that our staff, and I think the PUC and others really appreciate that, and those participating in the stakeholder group appreciate that. I think convening this many meetings with subgroups and bringing folks together is and looking at the technical and economic analysis that's going to be needed is something that outside consultant expertise will need. The report doesn't contain we think we need X amount for X process, but I think at least from the Energy Office and in coordination with the PUC, I think taking this report, and I think maybe what we're hearing some of today, what some of the focus should be, I think we're happy to provide a follow-up on what that could look like for resources. consultancy. I think if we were to do it, and I would assume we would, we'd need an RFP that people can respond to or companies can respond to. And my sense is there's a number of different companies, both in New England and in, across the country that would have interest in bidding and helping us do this. I think it'd be a combination of that stakeholder engagement, because I think that's really important to making sure we get this right. The economic modeling that you've mentioned, and the energy modeling. And I think there are a few groups that could assist us with that. So I think I'm happy to take that as a takeaway of what we think the range of that could look like and get back to you.
Any follow-up? Okay, I see the hand is down. So we'll go back to Representative Kessler. And Representative Kessler, you are muted. But
Man, you think I would have figured this out 2 years in the pandemic here? Oh. I'm tailing off of what Representative Grahowski was asking about funding. So it sounds like there's not quite a formulated ask yet, but you had mentioned any potential federal funds. Have you identified any federal funds that are currently available that could help assist with that?
Great question, Representative. We're going through what passed in the infrastructure bill, especially, and looking at what funding opportunities there will be. I think there's two sources of funds, at least as relate to energy, that I think we can be aware of. One is our formula funds. So these are funds from the U.S. Department of Energy that are formulaic in nature. So they come to the states based on either a preset formula or formula to be updated by DOE. It's the State Energy Program grant through that funds and has historically funded the GEO until budget funds came in the last couple of sessions, and will remain. And so there will be a slight increase in that. And then there are other potential formula funds that could support it, though many of them are tied to programs, right? So here's funding to work with the school to do efficiency upgrades or things like that. So we're analyzing that. There's competitive funds, that's the other half. So there's formula and there's competitive, and that I think is that's longer out. They put out a FOA, and then you compete for them versus other states or other projects. So all to say that we're working through what's in there. I think there's some possibility that some of the federal funding could go to support this, but there's not an obvious, this fund will support DG program design that I'm aware of. So some support, but other may be needed.
Follow-up question, please.
Yep.
Thank you. And do you envision with the sort of econometric staff help that you're looking for, including somebody that can well quantify the externalities, like impacts on climate change or health impacts? Do you envision incorporating that into the next year's analysis?
Thanks, Representative. I think that there's the discussion in 936 of benefits and costs of the analysis. And so I think my sense is that there would be a healthy discussion of both. So when you look at externalities, I think there would be some of that. Obviously, the more you layer onto an analysis, the higher the costs get, the higher that looks. So we'd have to think about as a group, how detailed we want to go down one of those externalities or the benefits or costs, but we'd envision a kind of robust cost benefit analysis.
Thanks.
Other questions from the committee? It's obviously a very important topic, a very important moment to check in on it. Just touch the subject of budget was touched on, and I believe Director Burgess, you have an annual report that'll be coming to us soon, and we'll have the opportunity to maybe discuss budget and resources and just an update on how things have evolved. I know they've evolved a good deal. So looking forward to that conversation as well.
You too. Thanks.
And I don't see questions from others, so I do have a couple of my own. You might be surprised to hear that. But I wanted to just ask about kind of going back to the overall flow, and I think it's sort of embedded in the presentation and in the report to a significant extent. But I'd be really interested in a little more detail on sort of how, like, what the work plan is, what you know, almost like a flow chart. Like what is the work plan that will carry you, this whole group, towards agreement on a, you know, not necessarily consensus agreement. I think Representative Grahowski's point was very important, that, you know, we work with majorities, you know, ultimately something has to be done. So it's, consensus is good to try for, but we want to ultimately push towards a decision. So both the consensus and the majority recommendations on a successor program. And so what is that work plan, and how do each of your working sessions sort of fit into that work plan? Does that document exist? Is that something you can share with us? Any comment on sort of how the flow looks from here?
Thanks, Chairman Barry. I'll ask Caitlin to, unfortunately, potentially to chime in too, but I think there was discussion of what, you know, what the next year would look like in a kind of straw proposal or outline generally. And I think some of that is in the report, and then some of it was just discussed as we tried to plan for the next year. So we've been, at the end of last year, we were meeting roughly bi-weekly. I'd imagine at least the beginning of this year, we, you know, look at meeting once every 3 weeks or every month as we kind of start to do some of the scoping of the work and of the RFPs, and then we would, I think, then begin to flush out what those stakeholder meetings look like. So in my mind, it's work plan, scope, development, and public meetings focused on particular topics. So you can see interested parties of the working group kind of fanning out on different topics, whether it's storage or income or bill impacts, and then bringing that back to the consultant to help us design that report. So mention the other folks' thoughts on this. That's my idea. And I guess I should have addressed this before. I mean, I don't think there was a time when either side kind of threw their hands up and was like, I'm not agreeing to this. And we offered the opportunity, like, okay, if you can't live with what's in here and we don't agree, we can say that, right? And so I think I don't want to leave folks with the idea that we didn't have difficult conversations, but I think, you know, the tenor of the conversations was, we can figure out the way to do this together. So I think you could see, as we get further down, the potential for that type of, you know, majority minority opinion to be written into a report, but we did work pretty hard to get everyone on the same page. But I don't know if others from the group have thoughts on timeline and next steps.
Work plan,
yeah.
Flow chart.
I would just say we're happy to provide that. I think that's what we see as the vital part of our next meeting. We got this report done, outlining where we are and what we've done, level setting where we are, and then I think that's the next step, is what's the next year look like.
Great. All right. Ms. O'Neill, Mr. Mueller, I don't see a hand, so I assume Director Burgess has answered the question as far as you're concerned. Let me go to Senator Lawrence next. And Senator Lawrence, your hand is up, but you are muted. So
yep, I just
there we go.
unmuted, so great. I should be fine. So thank you, Seth. And I guess my question is perhaps best responded to by Fortunat, since he raised it during the presentation. In this DG 2.0, you had talked about potentially the process of the PUC setting the price, or perhaps using the marketplace to set the price. Can you explain to me, or just, and I'm not asking you to restrict yourself to anything, or the committee to the group to restrict itself, but I'm just trying to get some kind of vision of how you would see the marketplace potentially setting the price on DG.
Sure. Well, so I think you're asking specifically about the sort of procurement options, and that is typically how we have the market identify the cost of building something, right? And so a well-designed competitive procurement that allows a competitive set of free market bidders and identifies what we're looking for. What are the parameters we want in the DG Solar project, and how do we value them all, and then let's companies, developers compete against each other to be the lowest cost provider is the mechanism for setting that price. So it's very similar, for example, to the competitive procurements that PUC has run the last 2 years for utility scale solar.
So kind of in this process, the PUC would say, this is how much DG solar we want, and they would put it out for procurement, and then the market would set the price.
Right. That's typically how the procurements work, right?
I'm just curious and trying to understand more about the process. So once the price is set, is it then fixed for the term of the contract, or does it have some kind of annual increase, or how does that work?
Well, I think that would be one of the details you would want to work out for the procurement itself, right? I mean, if you offer, give me your starting price and I will increase it at 1.5% a year for 20 years, your starting price will be lower. And if you offer, give me a fixed 20-year price, your starting price will be higher. And so the commission and other stakeholders should decide what is more desirable for the state, for ratepayers in general. Do we think sort of the state's discount rate is higher than the private developer's discount rate is essentially the sort of economic question you're asking. But in either case, as long as you are deciding what you want and then asking competitive bidders to offer proposals side by side, presumably you get the lowest cost. As this committee knows, the commission was not happy with the DG procurement they did, a year ago, a year and a half ago. And I think, many of you and many of us have done sort of post-mortem analysis and have, I think, a pretty solid understanding of why that procurement did not work the way that we hoped it would. And so, we'd be eager not to recreate the same challenges next time.
Yeah, I think that's, and my questions are more exploratory, just to understand kind of the process and the mechanics of how things would work. And I think that's what we're looking for, is to learn from the experience of what went on with DG before and figure out how in DG2 we might do it better and smarter.
Yes, I think that's also the goal of the stakeholder group. And so the stakeholder group does include a number of participants, both from the commission side, the utility side, and the developer side, who were active in that first round. And so I think as a group, we are eager to apply those lessons if we decide the procurement is the way to go.
Great, thank you, Fortunato. I'm all set, Seth.
Great, thank you, Senator Lawrence. And we'll go next to Representative Grahowski.
Thank you again. I was just, again, looking back at the statute, trying to ground myself in the to-do list, if you will. One thing I'm not sure if I missed in the report, but I know was important. I think Senator Lawrence originally flagged it, and I think it was important to a number of us based on the idea of growing our own clean energy economy here in Maine, so that there's as much economic benefit as possible through this clean energy transition. One of the things we asked for in this report was how to support the successful development of distributed generation by small companies based in the state. And I just wonder if I maybe missed it in the report, or if it wasn't addressed, or if you can just share any consensus or majority views on that, because I think it's a really important part of why we have a program like this.
Thanks, Representative. I'm happy to take that, and would also be interested in my other folks' views. And we spent some time discussing it. There was a discussion about I think the wording of that, but I think we generally took that to mean as we, like it's being done in the RPS procurement, that, or had been done in the RPS procurement, to look at where possible economic benefits or where allowable. Obviously, there's some so it was discussed, but I think more in a forward-looking view of how to do that. Obviously, Fortunate, you are a business in Maine, kind of working working through this, I'd be interested in your take. But I think we looked at it as a kind of a key tenet of what we could do going forward. I mean, obviously, there's been a lot of outside of Maine investment into the state, and there's some discussion of the importance of that too. But I might turn to Fortunat to help me answer that one.
Sure, Representative Grasky, good point. I think to talk about that sort of subparagraph D or whatever. That's at least that's the way it's identified in the intro slide here. And we did talk about it on in a number of different ways. It didn't get its own paragraph in the interim report, but the sort of question and the answers I think are embedded throughout different sections of the report. Among the conversations we had, is to identify sort of, obviously a solar project includes, a whole bunch of value streams and actors, making contributions from, the site host to the developer, to the construction company, to the O&M contractor, to the off-takers, and to the financier. And so we discussed sort of which of those is the one the legislature particularly wants to have sort of in Maine, if any or all. And then also, of course, there are, as Director Burgess mentioned, there are sort of Commerce Clause questions about preferencing local companies over companies from out of state. And so I think as we think about the program, and there are ways around that, but as we think around about the successor program, this will definitely be a part of the idea that Maine's investment in renewable energy ought to benefit Maine generally, I think is agreed upon by the whole stakeholder group. The questions are around the details of what does that mean, because it doesn't do Maine any good to throw up, a border wall at the Portsmouth border and say we don't actually want investment or great companies or intelligence or help from the rest of the country, because because just like Maine companies work in New Hampshire, Massachusetts, we're happy to have all shoulders to the wheel. It's a pretty big lift here.
Great. Back to Senator Lawrence. Unless is there anything on this particular topic, Representative Grahowski? Okay, well let's pursue this to the end, and then we'll go to Senator Lawrence.
Thank you. Yeah, I just appreciate that feedback and understanding where it's been fitting into your process so far. And I just want to underscore, for me at least, one thing, the importance of this, and I'm not saying we're going to write in statute, we must favor Maine businesses. Like, we know that we don't do that, right? But I remember during some of our hearings or meetings with comment when we were working on this legislation, some pretty small sort of startup companies that were based in Maine not making the thresholds because they didn't have the same capacity and experience as businesses outside of the state. And when we had to make hard cutoffs, there were winners and losers. And I hope that going forward, we can make sure that there are more winners that are, people trying to get into this field that are homegrown here. So I just want to underscore that is really important to me personally, that those people that have a dream of being the next revision, if you will, can achieve that and that they're not too late, because I think we're only at the beginning of this transition and there's a lot of opportunity here in the next decades.
Anyone want to answer
Yeah.
that?
Chairman Barry, if I might, I think just one, appreciate that. One thing I would just say an example of that would be in a future program design. If you do one type of route, all competitive, you're going to need potentially a larger infrastructure in order to participate in a PUC procurement, versus if you do a competitive that sets the price and allow a certain number of megawatts kind of first in. Those are examples of some of the discussions and the trade-offs of a future design program that would impact this. So,
And a feed-in tariff might accomplish something similar as well, I would think. Great. I'm going to go to Senator Lawrence next, and then back to you.
Thank you. I just wanted to follow up on Representative Grahowski's question, and I appreciate her raising that, since this was an issue I discussed in the NEB working group. And from my perspective, I understand the Commerce Clause issues, and we may not be able to to say specifically restrict it to Maine, but my goal is more to focus in on promoting small companies and small investors in this type of thing. And I think when we do that, we'll get a larger percentage of Maine companies, because people from Wyoming, small companies from Wyoming, are not necessarily going to invest all the way out here. Small companies tend to invest locally. So I have no problem with New Hampshire, Massachusetts, things like that. But to me, it's more, how do we protect these small investors to kind of level the playing field of competitive advantage? And that's what I would like the working group to kind of work on and kind of focus on going forward.
I think, as Director Burgess said, I think it's a really good point, Senator. You know, in the absence of sort of explicit preference for certain companies, I think the thing we talked about as a group is the best thing we can do to make the program accessible to a wide variety of companies, including small businesses, is to make the program work really well, to be predictable and consistent, right? When the program is, you know, or rules are changed as we go, or the program is half-baked when it rolls out, it favors the companies who can gamble and who have resources, you know, because they're playing in 20 different markets. And when the program is predictable and stable and well designed, then businesses, you know, new businesses can start up and build businesses around them. And so that definitely has been the focus of our conversation, although, as you noted, Representative, it's not sort of explicit. It was you know, it's been a big part of how we think about the framework, and I think it will continue.
Great. Back to Representative Krajewski.
Thank you. And I don't know if we need to sort of a chance to share and discuss back and forth, you know, what we were hoping for and what we've received. To just add one more of my thoughts to that, you know, there's a lot of ways to support small businesses. And I hope that part of that universe can be things like, is there technical expertise support that needs to happen? Is there, you know, a place for mentorships with successful program businesses in the state? You know, what are opportunities that aren't just, here's how to bid into this and we hope you do well. Because we're doing work, I think, with weatherization, for instance. We're trying to step up our apprenticeship programs and accessibility to build more of a Maine-based workforce. So I just hope that that's something that you can consider. There may be other ways to support that growth. And that's all I've got on this topic.
Great. Unless you have comment on that, I'll go on to a question of my own, Director Burgess. And my question is about objectives for the successor program, just kind of building off that idea of, you know, workflow and where we're going. And I apologize if I missed this in the report, but I'm really interested in how we get to specific objectives for this successor program. It seems to me that's a really critical place to start, right? Because if we don't know where we're going, then we might not get there. So what, you know, for example, objectives like, I mean, we just spoke about one, small businesses, but, you know, I also think of things like avoided T&D upgrade investments, you know, greenhouse gas was mentioned by Representative Kessler, land utilization has come up, social economic inequities perhaps, but you know, can you just give a little more color, and I apologize if you feel you've answered this, but just a little more color to sort of have, at what point do those specific objectives get formulated? How do you see that happening?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think the consensus that was achieved is about maximizing net benefits and ratepayer cost effectiveness. So I'll just say that generally. I think that we did get into the specific topics. I think Caitlin went through them a little bit about what exactly we think should, you know, those specific work groups be to look at those, and so we can certainly go through those a little bit more detail. I think we tried to make the report that summary and not all the documents that we went through in the meeting, but we can share that general framework that we went through that I think help inform the work plan, and then also some of those specifics. I guess one question that I think we've talked about a little bit is the big question is, that 7%, how much versus what's potentially to be installed, and I think the group will work through that as well to think about what the optimum amount is, and then you can kind of go from there as we go through that. But I see Ms. O'Neill has her hand up, so I would yield the floor if that's okay.
Yes.
Thank you. So Representative Berry, I think it's a great question. And frankly, all of these questions that you're asking us are fantastic. And honestly, are questions that we asked ourselves. And so I think part of this is you're seeing a lot of the discussion that we have had and that we will continue to have is how do we define what the best value is for main ratepayers, and how do you define value? And to be honest, we don't have a concrete answer to that because there are differences of opinion amongst the stakeholders as to how you define that. But that's certainly what we're working towards.
That's great. And I don't mean to suggest that it's easy, but I ask in the spirit of making sure that we're not spinning our wheels, and if there's anything that we can do to help with that process, other than just emphasizing that it may not need to be consensus based. Please let us know. Seeing no other hands, I'll go to, I do see a hand, Representative Kessler.
Great, thanks. I'm just curious to get your opinion on how engaged our two major utilities were in this process and forthcoming with information and expertise. Do you feel like they were good partners in the process and gave you guys the information you needed for discussion?
Thanks, Representative. Yes, I think that they took part in every meeting and had good feedback and provided information where asked. And I think I see others' heads shaking. I think we felt like they were at the table and constructive. Especially if you think about the impacts to the grid and current systems and what that will look like. And I think they were active participants. And part of the challenge of presenting on behalf of a stakeholder group is that, right? There are many different ideas and thoughts, and so I think a number of folks not here now had really good input throughout, but includes the utilities.
Sorry about that, I was muted. Seeing no hands, I'll go to a question of my own. We've spoken at some length now about the holistic grid planning process. Obviously, absolutely critical to figure that piece out. And I think your recommendations about how to implement that will be critical. We've talked a little bit about sort of the plan for tackling the rest of the committees of the group's work. A specific question I have is, does the group need additional expertise for that specific piece? I know that the PUC, as part of their grid mod docket, is working with a contractor, electric power engineers, and grid strategies. Would it be helpful if a subgroup of the stakeholder group worked closely with those contractors? Is there a possibility for some synergy there? How do you expect to proceed in that respect?
Thanks, Representative. I think that I can't speak for everyone involved in the group, but I think a majority of folks involved in this DG group have spoken to or provided feedback, at least initially, to the grid modernization group, to those consultants. And so I think there has been engagement overall, which I think is great. We did receive funding from last year to bring on additional resources in my office to help support this kind of grid planning power sector work, and we're working internally now on what that could look like, thinking about this report that's coming and not wanting to be duplicative. So there is some funding set aside and the potential for a limited contractor position to help support that, and we're working through that now, and we want to make sure that everything that's being considered in this distributed group, can be supported, or at least is informed by those other two efforts. So it's a really good question, and that's what we have for our office. And as we move forward, we'll definitely want to talk to you about if there's other things that might be needed in other places.
Great. I think the trick is to make sure everyone's involved and not too much is duplicative, right? Other questions? Okay, I do have one additional question around, we've discussed cost benefit, obviously having a clear set of goals and objectives, defining what costs, what benefits we want to look at is critical. I just want to be clear that the intent, as I understand it, is to use the stakeholder group to develop a cost benefit methodology, framework, set of goals that will ultimately guide program design, and potentially, hopefully, be adopted by the PUC so that we can implement a strong, clear DG program. Would you agree with that? Am I understanding correctly how you see the future?
Chair Bear, I think that's right. I think there's also, I think the stakeholder group will inform that scoping and process, and I think that includes benefits and costs. And then I think 936 is pretty clear about at least a few of the areas that it's directing us to look at. Obviously, it's not encompassing it's not an RFP scope, right? But I think it does set pretty clear direction on what that looks like, including ratepayer impacts, benefits, other benefits, potentially other costs, what a declining block program or NEP program could look like, what load reducers or impacts of considering a load reducers would look like, what financing could be there, innovations like storage, and then a stakeholder process. So I think it gave us the framework to begin to establish that in the interim, and then I think we'll do more of that over the coming few months. And I think, if there are other, priorities among those, I think we'd be happy to obviously welcome input from you all individually, and either through my office or all the work that we're doing is taking place in a public setting, and so we'd invite participation and feedback through that as well. But I think that's the sense. We'd go out with an agreed upon scope of cost benefits, what we think makes sense, see what we get for responses, and go from there.
Great. And final question for me, regarding the proposed economic analysis, any further color you can give to the specific topics, the scope of work, perhaps the contractor or type of contractor that you might be looking to, any of those things? And I can repeat that if you want.
No, Chair Bear, I think we've done some of this through other studies. Our RPS study has an economic analysis. The storage study we're doing contains some. The offshore wind studies we're doing. And then I think there's good models from other states that we can rely on to at least set up the boundaries for a main specific study. So I don't have real feedback on exactly the scope of work that would be there. As I mentioned before, I think there won't be a shortage of interested parties to help us do this. I think that I'm pretty confident that we would get some good responses back, and so I think we'll endeavor to do more of that scoping over the next few months.
Great, thank you. Any comments on those last questions from others? And seeing no hands, Mr. Mueller, go ahead.
Yeah, so I just want to add the point to what Director Burgess has said, that when it comes to the cost benefit test, I think one of the questions which may ultimately come back to this committee or the legislature is a great many of the what we call co-benefits of DG Solar do accrue to ratepayers, things like distribution transmission deferrals, resiliency, energy and capacity price suppression. But there are others that do not accrue to ratepayers specifically, or certainly not through the bill. And those are things like land use and equity. And the PUC and the utilities and most of the stakeholders, I think, are justifiably wary about considering those in a cost benefit test, even though they acknowledge they are real benefits, because they accrue to maybe a different group of people than the people paying the cost. And so there's a potential equity issue involved there. And so I think, I guess speaking for myself, I feel like there is a place for the legislature to help the commission and the stakeholder group sort of identify what is appropriate in the cost benefit test that is narrow for the program, and then what is appropriate for weighing the value of the program and DG more broadly.
Great, thank you. And I will just observe for the committee's sake, and maybe you want to comment on it, that we have this other working group around land use that's also proceeding, that Director Burgess is involved with, and I think perhaps others of you that are before us. As I understand it, the Department of Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry is kind of lead on that. I may be mistaken, but it seems to me that how we compensate distributed resources is a really important lever for making sure that location is done thoughtfully. And I don't just mean location with respect to benefits and direct benefits and costs to ratepayers, but also with respect to land use. We're a home rule state. We, municipalities, I think, struggle to catch up sometimes on these things. And so, if we want to protect prime farmland and prime forest, we do need to be really mindful of all that. And since we work in silos, that can be challenging. So, I guess I would ask your, any thoughts, observations about how we best merge those two discussions and make sure that we are really thoughtful about land use.
Chair, so our office was a co-lead on an ag solar working group that wrapped up or has produced or is finalizing the final report for that right now, looking at the impacts to agricultural operations and prime farmland and farmland that from solar. And so I think it's an important discussion. I think there's I didn't participate in all of the meetings, but I think you heard a wide variety of farmers that own land and see solar as an opportunity to support their ag operations, but also others that are rightly concerned about the overall impact to the state's prime farmlands. And so I'll just say, as Fortunate mentioned before, as you or Caitlin, when you look at the potential for adders or impacts, just that need to be mindful of the number of kind of beneficial or what gets stacked on, because that could increase cost. And so I think it comes down to program design, and I think there are good examples even in Massachusetts where they can provide adders or even disincentives. So I think it's going to be really important as we move that forward.
Great, thank you. And I apologize for not remembering that you were co-lead on that. Great, you got a lot of balls in the air. We appreciate that. Other questions, recommendations, discussion? All right, seeing none, we look forward to continuing this discussion with you and maybe picking up some of the threads in the annual report presentation. Very grateful to Mr. Tremblay, Mr. Mueller, Ms. O'Neill also for participating, and to you, Director Burgess, for the very important work. And with that, seeing no other questions, that concludes our work for today. We will convene on Tuesday for a public hearing at 9 o'clock and some additional work. So hope you all enjoy the weekend off, and it's great to see you all. Thanks so much, and talk to you soon.
Have a good day.
You too, Chris.